And welcome everybody to another Pantheon Rise of the Fallen stream, dev stream. Today we're going to talk a little bit about our road to alpha. Now, for those of you who have been paying attention, and most of you have been, we recently released a newsletter describing the steps, the features, and the things that we're working on to get Pantheon Rise of the Fallen to alpha. Now, we've talked with a lot of you over the past couple of weeks about it, and we realized that there's still a few questions. So we thought we'd do this stream to sort of go into a little bit more detail and tell you why we chose and prioritized exactly what we did, and hopefully that will give you a little bit of an insight as to what we're doing. But before we get into that, I did want to let you guys know that we are doing a 30-hour pre-alpha session this weekend, starting on Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. For those of you who are not VIP pledgers, there's still time to get in. You can go to pantheonmmo.com/pledge and join up for the pre-alpha session. It's the first time that we're doing 30 hours. It's mainly to kind of test the back end, test some of the systems, and mainly to see how organic play plays out over that long of a session. We're going to see where the bottlenecks happen, where the busy times are, sort of get an idea as to what we can start expecting as we move closer and closer towards alpha. Additionally, next week, this might pique some of your interest, I'm sure. Next week, we are putting up a job posting for a content creator, which is kind of exciting for all of us. So if you are a content creator who enjoy making videos, if you've got experience in writing, we will be putting up a posting next week on that. More details to follow, obviously, but keep an eye out on the forums, on Facebook, on Twitter, and see if you're a match. So without further ado, with me as always, sorry I forgot to introduce you at the beginning, Chris, is Chris Joppa-Perkins, Creative Director, a man who needs no introduction.
How you doing, everyone? I'll let it slide this time.
This one and only time. You'll notice that Dave is not with us today. He once again is out retrieving corpses, so he will join us again next month. So let's get started. So if we take a look at the very first thing on our alpha list, the very first priority above everything else is classes. So Chris, why was classes top priority for alpha?
Is mic level okay, by the way?
Let me bump it just a little bit.
I'm hearing through reading that you are loud and I am quiet and echoey. I guess I have a little bit of natural reverb in my voice, but it seems like it's more than usual.
Yeah, I think I'll add a bit more of a boost, but the levels look balanced on this.
I scooted my mic up a little bit, so Hopefully that's helping somewhat. Okay, well, while you do that, so classes, yeah. So we are talking about our prioritization for alpha, and maybe we can get in a little bit to the why. Why have we chosen these things as we talk about what they are in the order, but out of everything on the list, I think classes is pretty expected. Classes are the main way that we experience the game, and through the lens of the particular class, you're going to get such a very different, especially looking at where we're at come alpha and how the classes are continuing to develop. By the time we get to alpha, the experience of playing any one of the classes will be very unique, and we want to make sure that the fullest expression of what it is to play Pantheon from any one of those different vantage points is there and available. There's lots of different kinds of people, and people gravitate towards different classes for different reasons, and so that's one side of why we're choosing to focus on that. The other side, and probably the primary reason, because it's the reason that has the most to do with the development sense, is because every ability and every mechanic that we create and get functioning for the classes becomes a one-to-one opportunity for NPCs and NPC content and NPC functionality. And so as we look at building out all of the encounters in the game world and creating the kind of diversity of NPC and experience, that stems naturally and organically from getting the classes online. And we'll touch on that a little bit too when we talk about things like, the pet system, the ranged combat, and we've talked about that already. But that's really the main reason, is because we want to have as much to work with in getting all of our NPC encounters and content fleshed out as possible. And the primary way we do that is by getting the classes functional.
So one of the classes that's coming to fruition soon, that's getting its final push, is the monk.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. The monk is actually the next one that's coming online internally. The hope is that it will be ready by next pre-alpha session. So we have the 30-hour one coming up this weekend, and then the next one that we do, that's the goal, is to have the monk ready by then.
So the viewers are seeing on their screen now some of the monk animations that Ross has been working on.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that, with the monk especially, that has taken some time, is just the animation suite that goes along with a class like the monk. If you held up a shaman and a druid, or a shaman and a cleric, you're not going to see a lot of differentiation when it comes to animation. But if you hold up something like a warrior and a monk, you can see that the monk just has a very unique, everything flows out of a unique combat idol, which means that all of the animations they do in combat are going to need to have their own touch. And so that's a big reason why we tackled the monk, why we're tackling it now, is because we want to have we needed the time to get all the animations completed, and the sooner they're completed, the sooner we can iterate on them, polish them. And it's a lot of the same as with the ranger as well, because the range combat suite is coming along with them. We also have a lot of unique functionality with the monks too. They have a lot of charged abilities, which was a new ability type and a new mechanic that we needed to create. So right. Yeah, super excited about the monk.
So you touched on it. The ranger has some special mechanics as well, but the summoner as well, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
And both of these classes are going to require some special attention in terms of programming. They're a little bit outside of the norm, so that's why we're prioritizing those classes as well.
Sure.
So some of the design tweaks have been changed. A lot of it has come from the pre-alpha sessions, from some of the feedback that we've been getting. So just wanted to send a shout out to our pre-alpha testers and thank you for all of your suggestions. It's certainly been helping in our design approach. So along those lines, we talked a little bit about the monk, we talked a little bit about the ranger, just very briefly, and we talked very, very briefly about the summoner. So let's talk about pets, speaking of summoners, and why pets is second on our list, and why do pets need to be part of Alpha 1?
Well, pets really is the same conversation. We know we need to get classes in, and so part of that is getting the pet system online, because the summoner relies on them. But beyond the summoner, we have other aspects of the pet system that are necessary for the classes. So getting the summoner pets online and built out, for example, is a prerequisite for getting the charm ability and what we want to do with charm. Was talking with Kyle today actually about that, because we've been doing a lot of work on NPC combat awareness and combat functionality and making that more robust. We'll talk about that in a second. But one of the aspects of that is that NPCs use the same ability logic that players do, meaning NPCs have action and utility abilities, and they have a certain number of abilities available to them. And one of the cool things about that is when we think about charm, charm is not just gaining control of an NPC and then telling it to attack or stop. Charm actually gives you access in a discrete action bar to several of the actual abilities that NPC has that you can use at your discretion. And so charm is a pretty interesting and pretty important mechanic in Pantheon for enchanters. There's a lot of strategy that comes with what NPCs you have charmed, and how you're using them and when you're letting them loose to pick up something else. But then it also plays into the ranger beckoning system, which is what I talked about on the roundtable. The roundtable that just did a couple weeks ago, where rangers can go out and essentially tame different animals throughout the game world because of particular abilities that those animals provide to the ranger through beckoning, where they can beckon that animal in combat and use that ability. So there's a lot of pet related mechanics and support that will come through the summoner pets, and this all comes back to what is going to bring the most complete experience to alpha in terms of the different facets of the class play, the different facets of the NPC functionality.
And that ties right in, as you mentioned, our third top priority is the NPC combat awareness. So why is that so important? I guess we've already sort of answered that, but
well, it's also important because we've talked for a long time about how Pantheon is a challenging game, and one of the aspects of that is the strategic nature of the combat and the importance of being able to respond to what's happening, discern what's happening, and to understand that where there is challenge, there is a lot of NPCs need to be smart enough to respond to certain stimuli in a way that doesn't become overbearing in terms of becoming just too difficult. But for example, this is something we've been working on very focusedly right now, is this combat awareness. And what that means, for example, is our NPCs now can know that somebody is casting a spell in range of them that they're in combat with, and can use specific abilities based on that knowledge. So if I'm fighting an NPC and my group's fighting an NPC and I'm a healer and my tank's got it under control, and then I start casting a healing spell, that NPC knows that I'm a cleric, that I'm casting a spell, and that I'm casting a healing spell specifically, and they have an ability that they can use specifically to counter that, or specifically to, in preparation for that, something they can cast on another NPC nearby, to prepare them, for the healing that's coming in. And that, includes things like NPCs can know what any state that players are in, and respond to those in any way we desire them to. They can, sniff out the highest health, lowest health, or a certain percentage of health of any of their allies nearby, or any enemy, players they're in combat with. They can sniff for specific classes, specific races. They can sniff for specific abilities and buffs that are present on specific targets at specific times. And again, the key is that now they can utilize and wield specific abilities that are part of their loadout and designated to respond to those different stimuli.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Please.
No, I was just going to say there's a lot of depth to that system in and of itself, and in fact, there's so much that we're planning on a completely separate stream entirely on NPC combat awareness. So stay tuned for that coming up.
And look for that this coming weekend for our pre-alpha testers. This is all, right. Everything I'm talking about right now is stuff that you guys will be experiencing in just a few days. So looking forward to the feedback.
So that brings us to our fourth priority, which is the URP and networking. And given the importance of this, the URP is basically the universal rendering pipeline. Now, the networking portion is also equally important. What this is going to do, obviously, for an MMO, is super important because you have a lot of people connecting a lot of the time. So you want to make sure that things are running as optimally as possible. That's the short of it. Kyle and Rob can get into a much deeper discussion about it than I can, but that's the high level look at it. So it's understandable why that is so high, but why is it not in first priority? And Chris, I'll let you answer this one. Why did we not put this at number one?
Well, it has to do with prioritizing and sequencing your development efforts in a way that allows the most people to be most productive as possible. And I mean, to put it in very simple terms, if Kyle and Rob went heads down underwater on these specific elements right now, we as a design team, or we as an art team, or we as a content integration team, we only have as much runway as the current tools or the things that allow us to generate content will give. And so the more things that we get online and the more tools that our programming team is able to get functional and bring to a certain point, the more systems that our tools can support more deeply, the more runway that we have as non-programmers to generate content and push the game forward. And so what we're doing is we've identified the kind of the major things that we want to lay out runway for. That can be being worked on concurrently while this URP and networking push is happening. So, I mean, to simplify it even more, we want to make sure we can keep developing core aspects of the game while networking or while programming goes into this hyper focus on getting the networking stack and the URP transition knocked out. We've said a couple of times already, we're looking at a couple of months of focused work on that for programming. But that can't mean that we have a couple of months where the game isn't, moving forward. So we're just trying to poise and position the development efforts right now so that we can have the most runway to keep pushing things forward while that work is being done. It's really as simple as that.
Right. Fantastic. So another super important part of MMOs, as anyone of you will agree, I'm sure, is the social aspect of MMOs, and the biggest part, arguably, about the social aspect are guilds. So we do have guild functionality coming in for Alpha 1. I think it's fairly self-explanatory why we want that in for Alpha 1, but I do want to just touch on it very briefly. The guild system in and of itself, we're looking to do just some improvement over what you've seen in the past. So we've got a few ideas. We're running it by the tech team, or sorry, the programming team, and the rest of the creative team as well. Just sort of internally discussing our options here and seeing where we head with that. But we're pretty excited about what's coming down the pipe. That brings us to the perception system. And Chris, why is the perception system so important for Alpha 1?
So the perception system and the harvesting or the crafting and gathering system side by side are the two kind of secondary spheres of gameplay alongside and undergirding the adventuring sphere. And so we're putting the same emphasis on both, and that's to say that by the time Alpha rolls around, and it might be a good time just to step back very, very briefly and say the way that we're approaching Alpha is with kind of the current mindset of I would say the greater gaming community in mind. I can't even remember where we talked about this recently. Maybe it was in the roundtable again, but just there is something in the air when it comes to the last several years of games being in development, games launching, games being delayed, games being in early access, and we have so many examples of games coming into a larger public consumption mode and just simply not being prepared for that. Pre-alpha and alpha of today is different in many fundamental ways than it was, a decade ago. And so when we think about our alpha experience, we're thinking about, I think we've mentioned a number somewhere of 8,000 plus, additional people that will be coming in and getting their hands on Pantheon, playing it. Even though we will still have an NDA in place, impressions spread. Impressions have a way of just, making the rounds. Not to mention just the aspects of the game and the footage of the game that we'll be showing around that time. And so with that in mind, no, it's not launch. We're not looking to reach a level of perfection by any means or completion. But we're looking to make sure that the major pieces of the game, the major pieces of the experience of Pantheon are in place, and the perception system and the way that it, the specific and unique mode with which it brings story, content, and lore and context of the world to bear on the player and the world at large, the population of the players, the crafting and the gathering system, and how iconic and how fundamental that is, especially in Pantheon, to the way that the itemization and the economy of the game is enriched and contributed to. These are major aspects of the game, and so the testing time that they need and what they communicate to people playing is absolutely paramount. So that's why I made the list.
And that touches base on harvesting and crafting as well. If you want more information on harvesting and crafting and sort of a really fleshed out experience, or information rather, check out our February streams. You can find them on YouTube, on our channel, youtube.com/Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Banks have made the list for Alpha 1. Why do we want banks in Alpha 1?
You need banks.
You need banks. Good enough. It's true. Otherwise, you're carrying everything in your pocket and it gets really heavy really fast. So, next topic was the acclamation. So we need to further refine acclamation. Why is that part of Alpha 1?
So the main thing here is not only are we wanting to further refine acclamation, so, among the feedback that we've gotten from our pre-alpha testers and just what we're acutely aware of internally is we want to improve the experience, the user experience, the UI, and just everything that kind of supports acclamation. Acclamation is the climate and the acclamation systems and the way they kind of define a pretty significant part of what it means to play Pantheon, what it means to explore the game, and do that successfully. It's a big component, and it can't be clunky, it can't be cumbersome, and it is a little bit right now. It's difficult to navigate that aspect of the UI, and we want to improve that process. We also just want to make it a more, pleasing, visually and sonically pleasing experience. But fundamentally, it's wrapped up in a greater user interface, UI UX pass that we're going to be doing on several things just to improve that experience. But we also want to get additional climates into the game as well. So right now we've shown frigid, we've shown toxic, and come alpha, we're going to have scorching as well, and as well as wind shear. So those four are you can expect to see those.
Now we used to refer to something called atmospheres, which in a way are similar to climates, but we found that there's a lot of confusion as to what was what. So we've renamed atmospheres to fractures. And Chris, can you tell us sort of the fundamental difference between fractures and climates?
Yes. So we renamed atmospheres to fractures because even internally we were getting, when we would talk about climates or talk about atmospheres, they kind of intermingle. And so climates, again, are naturally occurring phenomenon in the game world. And naturally occurring meaning it's still fantasy based, so we're still talking about extremes of natural climate that require like magical means to protect yourself from through glyphs and other enchanted items and things like that. Atmospheres were always these unnatural phenomenon, these things that are just weird and quirky and supernatural even in nature. And so they were much more diversified in the way that you had to approach them. The way you approach extreme cold is pretty consistent. This is what I need to do to protect myself from extreme cold. But if you're talking about going from an area of shifting walls to frenetic floor to absolute darkness to intangibility, and these different types of unnatural phenomenon are very different, and they also have different ways of being circumvented. And that's the idea of these artifacts that allow you special traversal or a special mitigation for these, and other things that we'll be able to show more soon. But we wanted to rename it to fractures because we wanted to give it a better distinction from climates, because it is fundamentally different. And these fractures also give us something to kind of grab onto visually. When you think about how fractures will manifest in the game, this idea of a fracture being this kind of breaking in the seal of this mana that's kind of holding things together, the fabric of reality, if you will. And when that fracture occurs, and where that fracture occurs, can have a pretty emblematic visual to it. And then you can expect to see different kind of atmospheres existing around those fractures in particular. So it's a clarification, change in name, but it also gives us some cool handholds to make it a little bit more visually iconic in the game itself.
And that brings us on to climbing. We've shown off a lot of climbing over the past few streams. You just need to pick a stream, and there's probably climbing in it somewhere lately. Why did we choose to have climbing in Alpha 1? And what needs to be done, actually, specifically, to have it completed for Alpha 1? Because it's already in the game.
Climbing is relatively done in the sense that it has all of its underlying systems. There's always polish that is happening on everything as we move forward. Not just climbing, but the other game systems, combat, timing, fluidity, all kinds of improvements across the game, because we are constantly pushing to make it incrementally better as we move along. But climbing is essentially in the sense that everything that it relies on is present. What we want to do with climbing in particular is we want to decouple it from endurance, and we'll be establishing a climbing specific resource called grip, which will be its own thing, and therefore grip can be improved or diminished or just augmented in a way that's free from any kind of other resource that players have. So we don't want to use endurance. And then the other thing with climbing is we want to basically get it gamified. We want it to be put onto a skill system, which skills is something that is going to be coming online as well as we approach alpha. Skills are already in the game. If you've seen any of the gameplay, you're not seeing the skilling up process that you might expect. That is in the game. It's functional. All of the skills that govern everything that's going on are there, but they're not exposed to the player yet, in terms of you don't see them in your chat log. You don't see the actual skill up event. And currently they're also bound to level. So as soon as you level up, your skills automatically jump to the next highest tier. So getting that skill system exposed, and actually putting in the parameters of what governs the skill ups to happen is part of that step, and then getting climbing among the other things, working according to that is coming. So right now climbing isn't governed by a skill, basically, is what I'm saying. You can just climb. You can climb anything you want, as long as you have the endurance to climb it. Once the skill is in place, that will govern how much grip you exert when climbing, how quickly you can climb, and then improving that skill will allow you to climb further and faster.
So if you're a rock climber, keep in mind that Chris Perkins said, as of now, climbing takes no skill, but it will.
Hey, all right. It takes a lot of skill.
Yeah. Moving on to dispositions. So dispositions are something that's really cool about Pantheon. You have seen a disposition. We have mentioned it. I'll bring it back up on the screen now. We're going to show the pyrophobic disposition. Had to brighten the screen just a little bit because it was a dark area. But this is a pyrophobic disposition in Fortress Divier. So why do more dispositions need to be added in Alpha 1? And what kinds of dispositions can we expect?
Well, dispositions fit into the same category. They're part of the fundamental DNA of what Pantheon is. Even internally, again, referencing the upcoming test, you're going to see, our pre-alpha testers are going to see more dispositions happening and occurring naturally in an area than we've seen before. And it's going to start to really drive home, this is something that you are actually reckoning with as you adventure, as you play. You go to a dungeon you've went to 20 times, just fully expecting to, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go to location A, going to do this, going to go to location B, do that, boom, 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 I've done it a million times. But dispositions exist to shake that up, to disrupt that, and to, really constantly require players to be aware of what they're dealing with and what combinations of things they're potentially going to have to reckon with. So dispositions are coming along well. We currently have the pyrophobic disposition, the bloodthirsty disposition, the mana crazed disposition, and with the combat awareness stuff I was mentioning earlier, and the ability for NPCs to sniff out certain specific things, that gives us the foundation to get several more dispositions online very, very quickly. Internal testers will probably see at least 2 to 3 dispositions coming online over the next, for each session over the next few sessions, because we've, gained the ability to bring several of them online through that combat awareness work. So exciting.
Indeed. That brings us to loadouts. What are loadouts, and why are we why do we have those plotted for Alpha 1?
So loadouts are with our limited action set approach to combat, with our 8 action and 6 utility abilities. You have 14 abilities that you are capable of using in combat at any one time. Loadouts are the quality of life mechanic that allows you to set up specific loadouts for specific things. Simplest example is with a wizard. If I want to have a fire-based loadout with the majority of my fire abilities on my action bar, with some of my arcane abilities, but I also want to have a cold-focused loadout, then we want to make that really, really quick and easy for players to switch between. That's part of that tactical nature of combat, being able to not just within a specific fight and the kind of player-to-player synergy and tactics that need to occur, but then the way that dispositions and other things can cause you to quickly, as you move through an area, you need to be able to change your loadout and what you're capable of in the next fight relatively quickly and easily. So those loadouts, they are a quality of life feature, but they enable the limited action set to be experienced as intended.
And that brings us to our next topic, which is the return of swimming. We had swimming early on. We don't have swimming. We haven't had swimming in a while, but swimming is coming back. Why is that in Alpha 1? And what? Let's be specific too. What does swimming entail?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't want to assume that people understand kind of our ultimate plans for these things. So just to say briefly, swimming in Pantheon is not going to be like the typical MMO swimming experience that you'll see out there, in the sense that it's not going to be like overland content underwater where fighting a bunch of NPCs up here in a POI, and then I go underwater and there's a bunch of NPCs around POIs right underneath. And swimming is going to be more kind of the mysterious, open, expansive, murky depths kind of approach, where yes, there are going to be NPCs under the water, but they're going to be fewer and farther between. What really opens up for water is the exploration and discovery aspect of Pantheon, which is one of the deepest pillars and threads that runs through everything that we do. And so the ability to explore the water and find those nooks and crannies, push yourself, push your fear of swimming deeper and further and risking running out of air because it looks like there's a pocket down there with a bubble of air. I can refill my air with and keep going and see what's deeper. But then I've got to, as I get deeper, I'm starting to deal with the anaerobic climate, but also the pressure climate that's starting to get more intense. And by the time I realize I can't get any further, I see something in the distance that looks like it would be incredibly interesting, or there may be some really unique gatherables down there, or some kind of treasure, or some kind of something. But I just can't. The pressure is becoming too strong. So I've mentally mapped that in my head. I know I need to come back later once I have enough acclimation to pressure that I can get further and get down there and see it. That's a big part of what it means to play Pantheon. And so these are the kind of things that we're not planning on going super deep with underwater content for alpha, but we need some moments like that. And we also just need to be able to run into the water and swim. Again, that goes back to that, like what is this standard of public consumption that we want to be at for alpha? Do we need the perfect swimming animation? No. Do we need the perfect underwater visual? No. Do we need really compelling underwater content? No. But we do need to be able to run into water and not literally just run on the bottom and look like we're clipping through the world. So we want to get underwater volumes in. We want to get a swimming system in place, which we already pretty much have. And then we want to have a bit of a visual dialed in, and we want to start building at some of that exploration and discovery aspect of swimming at the very least.
Right on. So we also mentioned that we need an LFG tool for Alpha 1, which seemed to make sense to us because, again, it is a massively multiplayer online game, and we do create a lot of group-based content. So it seemed to make sense to us that people are going to need to find people to game with, to play with. While we can't get into any details about the LFG tool today, I can tell you that this ain't your grandpa's LFG tool. It ain't your papa's LFG tool no either. So it's going to be pretty cool. Can't wait to show it to you once we get that sort of fleshed out in the game a bit. Next item was factions. So why do factions need to be part of Alpha 1? And how do they play a part? How do they affect Alpha 1?
Our goal with factions are already in. They're already functioning. The faction system is fully intact. We just want to expand that out further and continue to build that out so that the role that factions play in the world has a larger, deeper footprint than it does at the moment.
Onboarding. Before we talk about why we put Alpha 1 in, or why we put onboarding in as a priority for Alpha 1, what is onboarding? We should probably clarify that.
Onboarding is just the approach to how you bring a new player into the game. It can be really heavy-handed in the form of in-your-face tutorialization that almost forces control over your player and causes you to do everything piece by piece. But that's not our plan. At the very, very foundational level, onboarding is just simply how you bring new players into your game. How do you acclimate them to what the game is about?
Well, and further to that, we have so many systems that we can't expect people to just inherently know how to use those systems. So we have to give some sort of guidance as to what these systems are and what they're used for.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sort of explains why it needs to be in Alpha 1. We don't want people to be completely lost as to what they're doing, and we do want people to actually be able to use the systems that we have in there. Character models and animations is a priority as well for Alpha 1. I'm going to bring up some of the Ranger animations, and maybe while I do that, Chris, you can sort of talk about why this is a priority for Alpha 1.
I don't even know that I would need to explain that one.
True. Maybe we can just let the video run and speak for itself.
Yeah. So we do have, these classes in the works that we've talked about. Ranger animating process has begun. It's really exciting, and we're moving to get these classes online as quickly as we can, and a lot of that comes through the animation process. We've got the monk fully animated, which is why we're able to start rolling it into implementation. As soon as the Ranger is fully animated, we'll be able to start doing the same with that class as well. Animations is one of those deceptively big aspects of MMO development, because, totally forgetting about the NPCs and the bipedal and the quadrupeds and, the others, and all the different animations that are necessary for those. The player classes require a significant amount of animations. Many of them are shared, and then several, like the monk, like the ranger, have quite a few unique ones as well. So, but yeah, the character models and character model animations, the NPC models and animations, pretty clear why that is important. And we're doing our best to push forward on all those fronts.
And that brings us to audio. We want more audio. We want better audio. Chris, you came on originally as the audio director for Pantheon. You've switched hats along the way. You still hold that position as well. But if anybody can give us some insight as to why audio is so important in a game, I think that person is you.
Yeah, well, it's super important. It's important for immersion. And I think of immersion, if you're going to be immersed in something, it has to be. This is one of those things that it's hard to put into words, but there's a kind of trust that you have to have in a thing to take whatever it is on the inside of us. Humans are pretty incredible creatures in terms of our imagination engines and the way that we're able to almost exist ourselves inside of an experience, and it has to be load bearing and capable of holding that and handling that. And the degree to which something is immersive is the degree to which you can exist yourself inside of it. And audio plays a huge role in that, and the consistency of audio and the believability of audio and the imminence with which things exist as you are existing inside of that thing. So that's one aspect of it and why it's so huge. The other one is in the user experience side of animation. So, and these are often little things, little audio cues, little subtle audio stings, and thumps, and the very small, intricate sounds that create, when you click on something, or you move something, or you pick something up in your inventory, or drop it, or you click on something in the world, or you open a window, or you get a private message from another player, or whatever it may be. That is also a big part of onboarding. It's a big part of polish, and it's a big part of helping the game communicate itself to the player well. And so it's a really big undertaking, and I'm excited that we as a company take it seriously. We as a team take it seriously. So yeah, expect expect really good things on the audio front as alpha rolls around.
So throughout all of these systems, and keep in mind, folks, that this isn't a complete list of everything that's going into alpha. These are just some of the biggest things to watch out for, to be aware of that's coming into alpha. Some of the headlining items, as we might say. But throughout it all, too, something that is equally, if not more important in some ways, is the content that's going into the game. So, Chris, if we could just take these last few minutes and talk a little bit about why we're focusing on levels 1 to 30 and sort of how we approach, or how we plan to approach alpha and the phases of alpha. While you do that, we're going to drop a bean here in form of a map.
So out of everything we've talked about today, I think we can sum up in one kind of phrase: content is king. Content will always be king. And that is the most important goal for moving into alpha. There needs to be things to do. What we're showing right now is the content of King's Reach in its fullness, the actual 3D terrain of King's Reach exists perfectly on top of this map. This is not a concepted map in a abstract sense. It is the actual terrain of King's Reach. And then these locked areas represent our pre-thinking in terms of expansion, and how, where, and how different areas can open up into further parts of the game world as the game ages and moves along. So filling this world, and this is one continent. This is the continent of King's Reach. The continent of Rainfall and White Thaw are also part of the launched game. But for Alpha, our goal is King's Reach, and we are approaching that in phases. And so when we launch Alpha 1, we are launching with a 1 to 30 experience in mind and the zones to match that. We want to have the starting areas for the three King's Reach races in place. We will have provision made for the non-King's Reach starting races, where they will temporarily be able to start and begin their journey on King's Reach in the alpha sense. And then we want a contiguous flow of zones that allow for that 1 to 30 experience to unfold. And so we're excited to show that because it represents this, the solidified game world, and our 1 to 30 phase. And I think, just to make it very clear, like this is the beginning of alpha, and then throughout the alpha testing, we will expand that 1 to 30 experience to include a 1 to 40 and eventually a 1 to 50 experience when all of King's Reach is brought online. So, yep. Anything you want to add to that?
No, that sums it up. But the phase approach is really kind of important so that we can keep. It's a unique situation when you're in development, doing development the way that we are, and with you guys too, crowdfunded and a lot of people interested. You really need to plan around these sort of phased releases, or these phased approaches, I should say. So it seemed to make sense for us for Alpha to start it off that way. Get the 1 to 30 in there first, and then move on from there. As you were testing out 1 to 30, we're putting in the fixes as well, but we're also looking towards the next phase and more content and more fleshing out of systems. So without Ronick here tonight, we would have done the patch notes. He would have sang a little song, but unfortunately he wasn't here. He is in chat though, so maybe he'll sing a little song in chat for you. But that's all we've got for tonight. We do have a few more minutes, though, so maybe we can open it up to a couple questions. I'm surprising the mods by saying this because I didn't think that we would have time for questions, so I'm not sure if they've gathered any. But Ronik, Madaki, anybody else in the channel there, if you have some good ones, we do have a few minutes that we can bang out. And anybody else too, you can just type in the chat there, and we'll address them as they come up. But so in terms of a timeline, no, we're not sharing a timeline yet. Once a timeline is 100% solidified, then we can share it. But that's not coming right now. No. When can we see the new class race matrix or hear some new combinations? That's a web design thing. I think we can probably put one up relatively easily. Let me get with Ronik and see what we can do about that. Can we hear anything about the infamy system yet? Sounded like it was about preventing super hardcore players from excessively.
We will not do anyone any good trying to cram that into the last few minutes here.
I think that's fair enough. What is the approximate time to level 1 to 30? I don't think we can even answer that because I don't think we really know. We have some pre-alpha testing to figure that out. What's our target though, Chris? Maybe that would.
Our target for 1 to 30?
Yeah. Do we really have a target?
I wouldn't say we have a target right now. What I said in the roundtable is probably the best thing to say, which is I'm other than the very general estimates I've already given, I'm not even worried about experience rate, and probably won't be until we get into beta. There's not anything really solid to give there just yet, beyond what we've already said.
Pantheon Plus asks if do we expect all races to be rigged and ready for Alpha? For Alpha 1, I'm guessing you're asking specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about playable races, yeah, I assume.
Yep. Yeah, there will still be, quite a few NPCs to be made by that time, but the player races, absolutely rigged, weighted, animated, able to, equip armor, all the different armor types. Good to go.
Right. Phantasm was asking about investor updates. We don't have anything we can share publicly. As you guys know, a lot of these investor updates need to remain private for various reasons. But what I can tell you is that we're very, very active right now. There are a lot of opportunities right now. So our biz dev team is working around the clock, and it's some cool stuff's happening. But I can't get into details about that just yet. Will all races and classes start with the same attributes? Will you be able to customize attributes at any stage outside of them, or outside of items, rather?
They will not start with the same attributes. Races will have a different starting attributes based on their race. We're not going to do class-based attributes, but races will have their own.
DM Harms is asking a question that's pertinent to the pre-alpha testers in terms of the zone terrain. Will we have the work in progress stuff for quite a bit longer? And I'm guessing you're talking about the gray box basic stuff. So we have been working on that. I don't know if we can give you a legitimate ETA on that, but Chris, maybe you have a bit more details on it.
So a lot of it is going to coincide with the URP conversion. So around the time that we finish the URP conversion is when you should probably start looking for an update on the terrain front. It does not, something to keep in mind, we're having really pretty terrain is good. We're excited to have real terrain. We have zones that have real terrain, and we love being in them. But when it comes to game development, Graybox is just as good, and it's not inhibiting us in any way, developing the other zones. Because the really cool thing, when you look at a Graybox zone, you say, how in the world does this have anything to do with a real terrain-based zone? But the reality is, these programs like Houdini, like Gaia, like some of the other procedural terrain generation tools and solutions, they actually eat that gray box terrain as literal data to spit out the height map for the actual terrain. So when you look at the terrain, the gray box terrain, it's not like some weird kind of, well, they just kind of built this in some random way to get something in place. That's literally every cliff, every angle, every plateau, every rise, every fall feeds verbatim into these terrain tools, and then they are able to procedurally generate the terrain and the erosion algorithms and all the different things that they do from that data. And so anytime you see us create a new zone, it will always be in a gray box sense, because that is actually what feeds into the Houdini tool to generate the terrain. So all that to say, it's still going to be some months before you see the terrain go from gray box to the real deal, but it doesn't mean that we're not able to continue developing the game world and building the different zones of the game, because it's feeding them through the terrain tool is actually the easy part. Once URP is in place, and once we have our terrain streaming and asset streaming tech to support that, and everything in place to do it. So hang in there, it's coming, and know that development is not in any way impeded by that.
Warboy is saying Joppa talked about maybe outsourcing certain work projects in order to move things along quicker in the future. Is there a potential example of what could be outsourced? So what I'm going to give you are examples of what could be outsourced, not necessarily what we are outsourcing. We sort of approach it as a needs-based thing. But the types of things that can be outsourced, as examples, are rigging. That helps with the animation process, character modeling, any 3D modeling really, creating objects for the world. Sound can be outsourced. 2D art can be outsourced. There's a lot of things. It's usually art related in some way, but there's a lot that can be outsourced as need arises. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we're sort of coming up on our time anyway. I know there are a few more questions. I apologize I didn't get around to all of them. There was a bit of scrolling going on, and now I'm getting a little bit dizzy. So before I get a headache from trying to scroll through this fast enough, I think we'll take this opportunity to wrap it up. Folks, thanks for coming. Thanks for watching tonight. This will be archived on YouTube, so if you missed it live, you can always watch it on YouTube in a few hours. And again, once again, thanks to our pre-alpha testers. You guys have been amazing. You've dug up things that we never would have thought of. You've given invaluable feedback. And just a reminder to everybody that there is another pre-alpha session coming up on Saturday through to Sunday. It's a 30-hour session, so lots of time to get in there, lots of time to play and do it on your own schedule. So the servers will be up for 30 hours. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. So if you're not a VIP pledger, there's still time. Go head on over to pantheonmmo.com/pledge. Those pledges go directly into development and are literally making Pantheon in front of your very eyes. It's how we are primarily funded, and it's how we keep moving forward. So thank you all for that. Chris, thanks for coming on the show once again.
Oh yeah, don't have to thank me. This is where I want to be.
And I was going to do a to all a good night, but instead we'll just say thanks for coming. Have a great night.
See you, everyone.